now. Hey, Joel, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real honor to have you on the show.
Hey, thank you, Patrick. It's a delight to be with you.
So for the audience out there who maybe, if they're unfamiliar with your work up until now, would you mind describing in your own words what it is that you do?
Well, I'm a farmer, and we farm without chemicals. We call it grass farming. And we don't plant grains even. So all the animals, we're in pastured livestock. We have beef, pork, chicken, turkey, eggs, rabbit, lamb, duck, and and everything moves on pasture. And so this isn't factory farming. It's non-hormone, non-antibiotic, non-chemical, but out on pasture with really great immune systems and a whole different nutrient profile.
I love it. And what's so interesting to me about the way that you farm is that it's organic, but it's also very counterintuitive to the way that farming is done today. Could you tell me where that idea began and how you first sort of started going against the grain in that fashion?
Yeah, well, going against the grain, I think, is in my DNA. My grandfather, my dad's dad, was a charter subscriber to Rodale's Organic Gardening and Farming magazine when it came out in whatever 1948, 49, something like that. And he always had a great big compost pile and didn't use chemicals. And he wasn't a farmer; he was a great gardener. He was a master gardener. And my dad got his kind of ecological bent from him, and so I got it from dad. So I grew up in this very weird eclectic home where religiously we were conservative, a conservative Christian family, but in agriculture all of our friends were hippies during the 60s and 70s. And I just thought that's the way it was. And then as I got older, I realized, well, yeah, that is the way it is, unfortunately. And so my view, my paradigm view, I've just grown up with a non-chemical, build the immune system, a terrain type view toward wellness rather than germ theory and pasteurization and annihilation.
And it seems like what you just described there with germ theory and annihilation, that's the more institutionalized version of farming today. And, right before we kick this off, we talked about how you're, sort of passionate for anything deinstitutionalized. How far does that extend in your business?
Well, yeah, it's all the way through. I mean, I do a lot of speaking, at least I used to, around the world. And one of my top titles is Welcome to the Heretics. And, we have every culture has an orthodoxy view, and then there's this kind of heretical subculture, and there are different issues and different things at different times throughout history. Right now, the orthodoxy is, let's just take the pandemic, for example. The orthodoxy is we're all waiting around for a vaccine. The vaccine's going to cure everything. Well, some of us don't believe in vaccines, or some of us think there are some harmful side effects to vaccines. And so a heretical view right now in our culture is to take a view that, well, instead of vaccines, why don't we build the immune system? Let's take some vitamin D and some zinc and let's build the immune system. That's kind of a heresy in our culture. The orthodoxy is everybody needs to wear a mask. Some of us believe that the mask is actually a petri dish and helps you to get sick, and doesn't actually have efficacy that you might think. And the fact is that there are no studies. There are no studies comparing mask wearing to non-mask. There are studies that indicate that masks help. Whatever your droplets
Yep.
from going across the room, that's true, but there's been no study linking droplets with the spread of the virus, empirically. And so a lot of us think that what we need to do is be changing our microbiome in our terrain to be immunologically functional. I mean, I'm still waiting for somebody to push Dr. Fauci aside. Say, tell you what, America, here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend 1 week building our immune system. Here's what we're going to do. We're not going to drink any Coca-Cola for a week or Mountain Dew. We're not going to go to McDonald's for a week. We're going to cook at home, not eat any processed food, eat whole foods that we cook ourselves and fix ourselves in our own kitchens. We're gonna spend 20 minutes a day working up at least a mild sweat. We're gonna get some exercise. We're gonna get outside for an hour a day, and we're gonna sleep for 8.5 hours a night. We're gonna drink at least 2 to 3 liters of water a day to stay hydrated. And to top it all off, we're going to forgive everybody we hate. You know, I mean, can you imagine? Why can't somebody in an official capacity give that simple recipe? But no, it's everybody's got to stay in their cave until the vaccine comes out, and so this whole orthodoxy versus the heresy has been with us since the beginning of civilization, and all that changes are the technologies or the issues that come to the fore in a given time.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable because even, I think if you went back a year and you asked, you said, hey, if there's a virus on its way, what would you do? And if you ask health officials, I'm sure the first thing, the immune system. But as a society, we've become fixated on certain things, like you mentioned, like the masks and like different, new coin terms like social distancing and things like that, rather than, the conventional, old fashioned logic. It's really interesting thing too, to see how that heresy is, amplified or, how it spreads on social media and on the internet, and how hard it is now to overcome it, maybe more so than ever before.
Oh, that's for sure. I mean, I remember 30, 40, more than 40, 45 years ago when Teresa and I began homeschooling our kids. This was before Homeschool Legal Defense Association with Michael Ferris. It was, at that time you drew the shades, you didn't ask, you didn't tell, and you hope nobody found out, because at that time, Child Protective Services would come to your home and actually steal your kids, take your kids away from you for being such a negligent parent as to be, in truancy violations.
Wow.
Teresa and I grew up at that time. Fortunately, a few years into it, HSLDA came along, and there was, a little more freedom to do. But that's a pretty horrendous thing. But there are plenty of business books written. I mean, they call heresy. They have a nicer name for it. They call it the lunatic fringe, and that's the lunatic fringe is where innovation always comes from. I mean, the cliche, they laughed at Fulton, right?
Yeah.
Who of course invented the steamboat. But the fact is that innovators are always ostracized, marginalized, and they're not accepted. I mean, I know when I made the decision to come back to the farm full time, I was what's the word? Not ostracized, but anyway, everybody in my, at college and high school, I mean, goodness, I remember in 11th grade, my last visit into the guidance counselor in high school, and I told her I wanted to farm, and I thought she was going to have an apoplectic seizure on the spot. And she just said, what, how dare you waste your brains and talent as a farmer? And, that, again, that's an orthodox position. The orthodox position in our culture is, blue collar is for C and D students. And if you've got any brains at all, you go be an engineer, a doctor, an attorney, a bureaucrat. And we even have terms like white collar and blue collar. Blue collar always said with a bit of a condescending sneer, as if, well, it's just unfortunate. You're one of those deplorables, those blue collar deplorables, and it's a very elitist orthodoxy. And I'll tell you what, the way things are going, we may be in for some pretty difficult times here in the next couple of years, economically, socially, culturally. And if I'm going through difficult times, I'd much rather have somebody with me who knows how to grow things, build things, and fix things than somebody who's graduated with a degree in feminine historical studies.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, it's so interesting to me, especially when you look at a lot the way that education, that elitism is sort of angled, is that people have to be very specialized in one thing, and I feel as if farmers particularly get sort of the worst end of this stereotype, where you mentioned there's doctors, engineers, attorneys, so forth, where uh, as a farmer, it's almost like you have to have a piece of each one of those things. And so having any sort of non-specialized profession these days is looked down upon, or misunderstood, where any farmer that I've talked to, there's a tremendous amount of information and knowledge that goes into doing it effectively, and understanding of all realms of knowledge, from health, medicine, chemicals, all sorts of different things that you need to understand to be able to do it effectively, not to mention the actual physical labor.
Yeah, well, farmers by nature have to be somewhat eclectic, because you have to be, you have to know numerous things and do numerous things. So yeah, there's an eclecticism, and eclecticism is the opposite of specialization, where you know a lot about one little thing, but Albert Einstein was unable to tie his shoes. Now, I'm not trying to denigrate Einstein, but I'm glad I know how to tie my shoes.
Yeah, there's a disconnect from practical knowledge these days. Um, it's you could have that degree, which might entitle you to be amongst the ranks of the quote elites, because you've gone through the formal education process. But in reality, as we approach some uncertain times, they're the ones that are most vulnerable to just the environment becoming a challenge for them to survive in.
Yeah, and just the ability to work with your hands. There's a lot of situations where people don't know where the battery is in their car. They don't know how to change a tire. I mean, just rudimentary things. If all you've ever done is sat on Netflix or video games, you're pretty disconnected from how to build a gate and how to grow a potato and whatever, butcher a chicken. And that's why I encourage. I mean, I'm such a big fan of children's gardens. I think that there's something humanizing about growing something, because you learn that there's a big world out there. I'm not the center of it. There are things going on, bugs and weather and fungus and actinomycetes and mycelium and all sorts of things, bees and pollen going on that I have very little control over, and I'm not the center of the universe. And I think that's an important way to grow up. When all you grow up with is playing video games, especially violent video games, you grow up with this in this fantasy world that everything is expendable and replaceable. So if my icon, if I run my car off the road, I wait a couple seconds and the game gives me a new car. That doesn't happen in real life. And when you grow up in that kind of a fantasy, you can enter adulthood with a tremendous amount of not only impractical thinking, but hubris, to think that, oh, I got the world at my fingertips, baby. I can turn this thing on and off at will. And the world doesn't work quite like that.
Yeah, not to mention the impression that young people have growing up with social media, which is a brand new phenomenon that we have no idea the effects or the long-term mental health effects that it'll have on people. Where I can imagine, as they enter the real world more and more, and they realize that people are not as perfect as they portray themselves on social media, that it'll be alarming. It'll be shocking.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, who puts their worst foot forward on social media? So again, that creates these dream fantasies for people. Well, and then you suffer self-esteem, self-affirmation, confidence. Because, well, I could never measure up to that person. Well, you're only seeing the 10% of that person that's glowing, and so then you develop this whole false um, false impression, and suddenly you realize in your own life, well, I'm not that perfect. And I had actually a child psychologist here just a couple weeks ago here at the farm, and she was telling me that that the number of child and adolescent psychological problems are just exploding through isolation, through depression, and I mean, to the point where she's having to hospitalize kids, and it's pretty, it's a pretty dramatic thing. It's not good.
Yeah, and it's I actually just spoke about this with another podcast guest I had on just recently. This guy Raghunath Kapo, who is a yoga teacher, and we are talking about how related to those mental health issues that young people are having more and more is also the method of solving those issues with prescription drugs, as opposed to old-fashioned conventional means, which I can't imagine the repercussions that's going to have.
Well, sure, absolutely, and then when you look at our food system, and our food system has become so simplified, and chemicalized. So we're ingesting materials that we're not supposed to ingest, that are unpronounceable, that you can't make in your own kitchen. And on the other hand, they've been extremely simplified. Beef that's grown in a feedlot essentially gets about 3 or 4 ingredients in its diet. But for example, pasture finished beef from our farm is eating up to 20 different kinds of plants a day, and all that variety creates different enzymes. It creates different minerals, different things, and who knows what that one bacteria in your microbiome that needs derivatives of plantain, for example. If it can't get that, then that becomes lethargic, and actually over time it probably dies or goes away, and you've just lost some of the diversity and the resiliency in your own gut. We now know that the link between the gut health and mental health is closely linked. And if your gut is not healthy, then your mental health will be in jeopardy. And so it's imperative that we get the full spectrum of options into our microbiome, into our gut, to actually feed the full array of bacterial life that's there. So we have a very complex gut, which then allows us a complexity of mental, an ability in our mental state to handle complex things and to think, in a complex way. When you see the soil as just nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, and you simplify the soil, then you simplify the plants, you simplify the animals, you simplify your own gut, you simplify your mental capacity, and suddenly you don't have the capacity to handle the complexities of life.
It's so interesting seeing this simplification happen across the board in a number of different industries and number of different parts of life. And what I like so much about what you do at Polyface Farm is how you focus on a natural approach and create more of an ecosystem, like the way things are sort of intended, you could say, maybe, a way that there's a lot of synchronicity between different parts of your operation, like the reading on your website about how, the chickens clean up after they feed off of the cow poop and things like that, by eating the, protein rich larva. This is sort of like a whole life cycle, a whole, nutrition based life cycle that happens on your farm. And it's amazing to me to see how many areas we're disconnected uh, in our, overall, society that we live in today, versus how nature sort of has remedies for these things that we've lost sight of. And it's as if, the sort of, if you look at the farming industry, the way that you do it versus the way that, the industrial, maybe factory farms do it, that it's sort of a microcosm for what's happening across the board. What have you considered ways or imagined ways to sort of close any of those disconnects, you know, either in farming or, in some of these other areas of life, where maybe perhaps people can have more exposure to a more natural method or way of doing things?
Yeah, well, for sure, for sure. One remedy is to do something for yourself, and I don't care even if you live in a 10th floor condominium in a big city. You can do something. You can participate with life, at least rudimentarily. I don't know if that's a word, but in a rudimentary way.
It's okay. I know
Um,
what it means.
you know what it means. Even if you just have one of these little earthworm kits under your sink, little worm bin under your sink that you can buy, and their little kits are about the size of a football, and you can put your kitchen scraps in there and feed your worms. And I mean, it's therapy for the soul. We humans, that prefix huma is pretty close to humus, and when we are never in touch with our ecological umbilical in a visceral way, we move into some sort of an unmoored, unanchored position. And there's no wonder that we have way more, for example, social instability in urban environments than in rural environments. I'm sure you're well aware that there's an urban exodus occurring right now. I mean, people are fleeing the cities from everything that's going on. And nobody wants to ride out cultural collapse in an urban setting. They're looking for something where they can have a garden and a pantry and a solarium on the side of their house, and grow something, have a little bit of a stash, if you will. But another thing that so that's one element. But on the farm itself, one of the biggest attacks we get or arguments that we get against what we do is that the way we farm takes more people. It takes more people on the farm. That's absolutely true. So I'm guilty as charged. And of course, that's all we said. Well, what you do, it takes more farmers, and it's said with a bit of a condescension, as I can't imagine anything more barbaric for a techno glitzy, socially elite culture like ours than to have a system that has more farmers.
Yeah, God forbid you betray the bottom line.
Yeah, right. So I guilty as charged. But what I find is that when we run a people-centric farm, so we're substituting people for energy intensity, capital intensity, and pharmaceutical intensity. And I think it's a fair trade to reduce those three intensities for people intensity, because what that does is it moves our equity from stuff and physical things. It moves our equity then to skill, knowledge, and relationships. And I'll trade all the capital, energy, pharmaceutical, depreciable intensity in the world to move my equity into skill, knowledge, and relationships any kind of day. There's no banker A banker can come and repossess your tractor. He can repossess your cow, and he can foreclose on your tomato plants, but he can never come and foreclose on what you know and what you know how to do. And he can't foreclose on your relationships. So in my view, from a business standpoint, you become much more stable when as you invest and move your equity over into these more people-centric um, uh, values.
Yeah, it's remarkable because I think if you ask anyone on the street which option they would prefer, whether it was, maybe a bigger bottom line, and more things and stuff and equity related to their things and, physical objects versus having stronger relationships, happier people, healthier people, I think they would generally choose the latter, but it's a decision that people aren't consciously making. It's sort of these various corporations that are sort of making these decisions on people's behalf, without the ability for regular people to determine for themselves. And I think a lot of people don't know what kind of outlet to choose to be able to support. Uh,
Well, again, yeah,
alternative.
great. I mean, sure. Again, that's the orthodoxy.
Yeah,
I mean, very few people, will buck the orthodoxy. I mean, how many people will look their, high school guidance counselor in the eye, especially a smart student that's in the honor club, and say, I'm going to pursue, mentorship and trade school because I don't want to sit in a Dilbert cubicle at the end of an expressway punching numbers into cyberspace, working for, a nameless, fameless cyber entity all my life. And I mean, the fact that almost 80% of Americans hate their jobs is a damning data point that a culture supposedly as innovative and creative as the American culture is, we can't create vocational habitats that people you know don't want to get up and come to. I mean, that's a horrendous thing. It was interesting to me that I just read in an article yesterday that during this pandemic, 62% of all jobs have been done at home. So of course, the office has been vacated in favor of staying at home and working from home. But that number, 62%. So 62% of jobs can be done at home. And I'm thinking, well, who's building anything? Who's growing anything? Who's fixing stuff? And indeed, you look around, if you'll be hard pressed to find a plumber, under 50 years old, an electrician under 50 years old. Farmer, the average age of a farmer is now 60. And
wow.
in the business climate, anytime an economic sector has a median practitioner age of more than 35, it's a sector that's in decline. So farmers are not 35; we're all the way up to 60. So these trade tracks are just whatever. They're just falling away, and
Yeah.
you wonder, who's really doing who's doing tangible work, who's doing things that I can touch and feel. We had a really interesting thing happen. One of our apprentices came to us. He was a crackerjack, whatever, IT guy, worked for, a big global financial institution in New York City, down in the bowels of the beast. And one day he just kind of had a
Break.
come apart. And yeah, break. He said, man, I got to get out of here. And he went down, he just started looking at things. He found us. He applied for the apprenticeship, and we took him, and he'd been here for, a couple months. And he came into supper one day, and he was literally crying. He was, and I asked him at supper, I said, what's wrong? He said, when I worked for that big outfit in New York, said, I was on a 4-member team. I was the one in New York. One guy was in Hong Kong. One guy was in Shanghai, and one guy was in London. Every day we built financial fantasy, spreadsheets, and clicked a button, sent them into cyberspace, and that was our day's work. And he said, here today, we built that was particular day. We built a Millennium Feathernet. It's a portable chicken house, and we call it the Millennium Feathernet. And he said, today I built this thing with a group of people that we could actually, respond to, we could touch, we could see, and we built that thing. It was a physical thing. And he said, and I realized when I wake up in the morning, it's still going to be there. And he just literally emotionally broke down with the profoundness of the difference between this cyberspace world versus a physical, visceral practicality. And it was quite a touching moment. It touched me profoundly as well.
So I could imagine. I mean, it is that disconnect from doing anything real and satisfying, working with your hands, the way that, humans evolved to work for, hundreds of thousands of years, to build things, create things. And so many people are, it's sort of like we have like a bankrupted human experience now. And when you mentioned the, sort of just like how those tracks of, the different trades are just fading away, it's something that hits me pretty hard because, this is Knowledge Without College podcast. I can't help but to place some of the blame on the, universities and institutions that sort of funnel young people into their, system, load them up with debt and then send them out to the corporate world with or without a degree, in a situation where, now they're not really able to, they're just geared away from doing anything that's, blue collar, like we were talking about before, because it's sort of looked down upon.
Yeah. Well, we here at Polyface, we run a full bore apprenticeship, and we don't call them stewards, interns. We call them stewards. And the stewardship is for 5 months, and then the apprenticeship is you can go on. That's kind of the next level, the next graduate level, kind of from journeyman, as you move up toward mastery, and when we started this program 25 years ago, almost everybody who came was 18, 19. They were kind of just out of high school, not ready to go to college. And that was kind of the demographic. Today, I want to say majority. I shouldn't say majority, but certainly many, if not more than 50%, are actually late 20s, and even as late as 30, 31, 32 years old. They're 5, 6, 7 years into this white collar career track, and they're burned out. They're literally burned out. They find themselves, one of the comments here is, I was sitting there in my cubicle, staring out the window and realizing I'd rather be that guy down there running the zero-turn mower, mowing the corporate office lawn than sitting there in my cubicle. And so we've watched this shift over 25 years. We've really watched this shift to where the burnout factor seems to be getting progressively younger and younger as the system chews up and spits out people. And so we of course we welcome them, and they get tanned and toned and physically fit, and they just shine, because so many of these young people are simply going down an orthodox track that parents and friends and guidance counselors, the orthodox system has they're all sharp, they're real sharp. They're not dummies at all, but they got pushed down this track, and that's what you do when you're when you have brains, and what they really want to do is herd cows or grow tomatoes or, build compost piles. And, and it's just wonderful to watch the transformation emotionally and mentally in them when they leave that cubicle and they actually find their soul in the soil. It's quite profound. And I think our country has done a great disservice to people, you know, by just assuming that unless you make D's in school, you're supposed to go to the city and do something. And I would just say one more thing. I think that we also do our children a disservice by calling all the things that they used to do throughout history as they interacted with the adult world in meaningful ways. We've now called that child abuse or exploitation. And I mean, a lady was telling me the other day, she said, she was out in Washington State, said when they were kids, in the summer, the school buses would all be rented by the orchards in the area, and they'd post their schedules, and the school bus would drive down through the town, and they had pickup spots, and if you wanted to go earn some money, you were down there to meet the bus, and then they take you out to the orchard. You pick apples all day, and they'd pay you, and then you could go to the movies. Or you had money jingling in your pocket. This is the way they grew up. I mean, can you imagine that today? A private company renting public school buses, that would be anathema. And then imagine an orchardist using 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids to pick their apples. That would be exploitation and abuse. So instead, the kids sit around on video games, have no practical experience, and hit 18 and 19 and have no clue who they are, what their heart passion is, or what they ought to do in life. And that's a horrendous thing to burden a young person with.
I know I can already imagine the highly clickable headlines, local farm exploits child labor, and it's unfortunate that we're not able to create experiences like that for people with all of our understanding of how development and psychology works, to give, especially the young people, especially children, access to those kinds of experiences to create character. It's like we've completely lost track of those essential pieces of the human experience.
Well, sure. And I'm a big believer in child entrepreneurism. And I think that there's kind of a golden age between about 8 and 10 years old that virtually every child should have a business, some sort of a business. And I speak at homeschool conventions, and one of my favorite things is I've got a room of whatever 200 or 300 people, and I just ask them to shout out, if you've got a child under 14 that's running a business, just shout out what it is. You would be amazed at, from everything from, dog grooming to the old traditional lawn mowing to shoveling snow, tending a garden. They're just a host of these things that making things that children can do. And I know for me, it was instrumental in my development. I started my chicken business when I was 10 years old. Started with laying chickens and had them all through school, and I never got an allowance. And but that's how I made my money. And you learn about profit and loss, and you learn that you reap what you sow, and if you don't take care of things, they kind of go south. And I mean, all these just basic character issues for life. There's no reason why you can't learn that at 10 or 11. Why do you have to be, a wrecked 35-year-old, before you start getting the reality of some of these lessons? It's much better to get these lessons when you're a little child. You've got resilience, and you've got parents to kind of help you through that. And I think that kind of under 8 years old, a child often kind of doesn't know what money is. It's hard to kind of get some of these, balance sheets and business kind of concepts. But after 10 or 11, then they start getting kind of peer dependent, then they want to be cool, right? You gotta be cool. And so I just think there's this magic age between 8 and 10 where a child can start a business and, and they're not self-conscious about it. They don't mind walking up to somebody at, a friend and saying, hey, I'm making brownies. You want to buy a dozen? They're not self-conscious about that. And who can turn them down? It's great. It's a great marketing thing. Our little granddaughter, her brothers, one of them has a duck business, sells duck eggs, and one of them has a lamb business and sells lambs. And she's the younger of the bunch. And so here she sees her brothers, doing their business. And one day she went out and picked a bunch of wildflowers, and we had customers coming to the farm to get chickens. And so she laid in wait for the right guy. And the guy walked in by himself, to pick up his chickens. And she walks right up to him with her hand full of flowers. She says, I picked these flowers. I'm selling them for $1. And I'm sure, that your wife would enjoy, you bringing home some flowers to her. But listen to this, not, having all her bases covered, she quickly said, and if you don't have a wife, I'm sure a lady somewhere who would love to have flowers. But a 12-year-old won't do that. A 12-year-old is much more self-conscious. But a 5, 6, 7-year-old, completely unabashed. And you can't dislike them. You can't say, well, you're being kind of pushy. You'd never say that to a 5, 6, 7-year-old. They're just trying to interact with the adult world. And I think that we have really, really missed the boat in our country by prohibiting, literally, not allowing our young people the privilege of this real practical adult interaction. You can't Google experience.
Yep.
And there's no equity. There's no equity like experience.
So, ultimately it goes back to this, orthodoxy versus the heresy. And the question that keeps coming to my mind is, how do you flip it? How do you make, the adjustments? How do you instill values in people to understand, where their focus should be? Have you given that question any thought?
Well, look, if anybody knows how to flip orthodoxy, they're going to be a
wealthy person. Yeah.
I mean, by definition, orthodoxy is whatever. It's unflippable. Well, no, I wouldn't say it's unflippable. Let's think about some orthodoxies that actually have flipped. For example, my forte is food. So think about that. For years and years, for decades, the USDA orthodoxy was you don't want to eat butter and lard. You want hydrogenated vegetable oil. And finally here, 10 years ago, that completely flipped to where now, the recommended amount of hydrogenated vegetable oil to consume is 0. There was a day when, every magazine was full of ads for DDT. I mean, powder your kids with it and, put it on everything, and DDT was ubiquitous. And then, then the culture changed. So it can flip, but it normally doesn't flip overnight. It's a drawn out affair. And normally it takes some catastrophic thing, some sort of catastrophic thing to actually get the attention of people. I mean, it could be. I'm just thinking out loud here that this whole pandemic thing, that one of the catastrophic outcomes of it is a mass movement toward homeschooling and, deinstitutionalized learning. I mean, people are wanting to, come out to the farm, have a farm school. I mean, they're wanting to do anything that's not that public school classroom. And, I don't know. I guess, they say that it takes 60 days. A habit is created if you do this, if you change your routine, change your habit for 60 days, do it for 60 days straight, then it becomes a habit, whatever this new thing. Well,
Yep.
The pandemic is now going on longer than 60 days. And the longer we keep these kids out of school, the longer alternative kind of teaching things are going to come to the fore. And it could be that one of the fallouts of this is just a massive uptick in all, deinstitutionalized teaching options. And that would be a very exciting flip.
Yeah, it's interesting how it takes, usually some sort of like disaster, tragedy, war, or something like that to unite the values of people that are sort of subjected to the violence or whatever, sort of get people on the same page. It's pretty interesting to see that happen. And almost, I wonder if, the reason why we're so segmented and fragmented right now is because things have been easy for so long. It seems like the last time there was really some unifying event was probably World War II.
Well, yes, you're right. That luxury, the convenience and luxury make us lethargic, physically, mentally, spiritually, everything. I mean, I'm in livestock, so you can imagine that I get routinely assaulted on social media, even in public, for killing animals.
Sure.
So Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat. You've got the whole vegan movement. You got PETA, all this stuff, and it all is pretty aggressive against any kind of domestic livestock thing. And it just strikes me that in any other time in human history, we wouldn't have had the time and the luxury to sit around thinking whether we should eat a beef or not. I mean, if you could shoot it, trap it, or catch it, you lived another day.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're actually sitting around with focus groups, with the luxury of asking ourselves, wonder if I should eat a chicken, or eat an egg, just shows the level of luxurious imbalance in our system.
I had this conversation with another guest at one point about that exact idea where we have this time to think about, the ethics behind killing animals, using them for food and all that sort of stuff. And, on one hand, you'd think that that's a, sort of like the more enlightened way of thinking. Whereas, sort of the dichotomy is at the same time, atheism is growing, in direct proportion to the number of vegetarians, I would assume, or vegans. And it's a strange phenomenon to watch sort of people enforce ethical boundaries around food and food production, while at the same time, it seems that the country is moving dramatically and quickly away from, sort of being based off of an orthodoxy of, Western tradition or religion.
Yeah. Well, it's also interesting that these whole these systems depend on monocultures and chemicals and soil erosion and aquifer irrigation, all the things that normally that kind of a environmental ecological bent would endorse, and yet they're actually promoting an eating style that is completely anti-ecological. And if you want to build soils, you do it with perennials. You don't do it with annuals. If you want true nutrient density for your system, you want assimilatable nutrients, not hard to assimilate nutrients from beans. I'm not trying to demonize beans. I'm just saying to get the same amount, we're going to have a world of flatulence. So the point is that that there's incredible, not only inconsistency, but even hypocrisy at its most elemental level in the thinking. And when you realize, I mean, I'll give you an example. B vitamins, riboflavin is one of them, and those are critical for thought processes. And grain finished beef, for example, or I'll just say this: grass finished beef has 300% more riboflavin than grain finished beef, and so that's just one example of a key nutrient that that you can't get through an alternative source. And where they say, well, we'll take a supplement. Well, whatever happened to just eating a broad spectrum of nutrient dense foods? Why does everything have to be done in a laboratory? And so the very fact that slaughtering an animal is now considered barbaric and Neanderthal and unsophisticated is not a new indicator of some sort of new nirvana cosmic awareness. It's an indicator of a profound devolution into a disconnect with our ecological umbilical and our dependence on it, and its full, magnificent, awesome, abundant complexity that's required to work.
It's interesting how the complexity too, like I mentioned earlier about, just the way your farm operates, the complexity usually it's like nature has a system already sort of pre-designed, pre-built. There's sort of like a schematic to it that if utilized properly, there can be a lot of harmony in doing multiple things at the same time rather than, segmenting and compartmentalizing, the focus on each individual thing or each individual, for the farm example, like utilizing, if you have a chicken farm or a cattle farm versus, mixing them together and having that harmony between the two.
Sure. Well, there's nature moves towards symbiosis, and that symbiosis is created by the complexity. And so, when we just have a chicken farm or a cow farm or a dairy or an apple orchard, we, by definition, we have created a simplification of the of the polyculture that nature uses for resilience and for symbiosis. And so on our farm, one of the reasons we have all the different animals is because we follow the cows with the chickens. We aerate compost piles with pigs. There are all sorts of useful ways to to incorporate the animals in an integrated system rather than a segregated system. And our food system is the same way. If a college dining services begins composting their food waste, where a truck comes, picks it up, takes it to a composting facility, they get some sort of greenie award. Well, that's not greenie. What's really greenie would be to build a chicken house behind the dining services. All the food scraps go in a chicken house. The chickens eat the food scraps, lay eggs. The eggs go back in. Now you have an actual functional circle, between nothing has to go on a truck. Nothing gets segregated off site, and you integrate everything. And the yardscape crew, the generating wood chips and biomass and lawn clippings, that goes in for bedding for the chicks. For the chickens make the compost. The compost goes on the plants, and the plants on the campus can be edible instead of inedible. So the students can graze from building to building, and the strawberries in quadrant 3 are ready today. The asparagus in quadrant 5 is ready today. We can actually create nests and wombs of abundance. And instead, what we have is scarcity, segregation, and disconnectedness. And this is not rocket science. This is very, very practical. We know how to do this. We just lack the will to think and question orthodoxy.
Well, I'm really glad that there's, people like yourself out there, and that you do what you do with Polyface Farm to, highlight that, because I think I think with this pandemic, with all that's going on, I think, you're well positioned for the way that the future trends may be headed, where people are returning to, a more natural way of doing things. People will start to question sort of the way that we have been doing things. The pendulum will swing back the other way. And I think, I'm glad that you're able to, share this information and, make it so available and transparent to the public. I think it's a critical service that you're performing, and I commend you for that.
Well, thank you, it's great to be able to share with you. These concepts are not new, but they're contextually new today. So they need to be customized. They need to be customized to be relevant and credible for today's world, or today's situation. And yeah, I'm just glad to have the podium and the conversation. It's great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, and I'm, it's unfortunate. I was just over in Virginia. I wish I took some time to try and make it out to see the farm.
Well, next time.
Next time for sure. Joel, or, do you have anything on the horizon that, related to these concepts that, for the general public to consume? I know you've written a number of books. Do you have anything on the way?
Yeah, well, we just released a book about a month ago. The title is Beyond Labels, and I co-wrote it with a PhD in nutrition, Dr. Sina McCullough, and she has a fantastic story of sickness and healing through lifestyle and food. And so what this is kind of a continuum to take you from wherever you are to a place of maximum health on a continuum. And so that's just come out a month ago. I think it's a great book. We're getting some great reviews. It's getting some real traction, selling very well. And I think it's obviously, when we started on this more than a year ago, we had no clue that we would be in the situation we're in, but it couldn't be more appropriate for your own health and building your immunity system and your wellness structure. It couldn't be more timely for that. And then I've got another book coming out in about a month. The title is Polyface Design. So a lot of people, they see what we're doing, and, oh, that's pretty cool, but how do I build an eggmobile? How do I build a shade mobile, a gobbledygook, a millennium feather net? So, they want to know how to do that. And so this is a design book, a real nice diagram how-to book that has all of our designs, all of our diagrams in it. And I hope it just empowers thousands of homesteaders, do-it-yourselfers, and self-reliant folks that are ready to make the shift and grow some of their own livestock.
I love how you make that available to people. You don't conceal it or hide it, because, like we're talking about, it's like more people they need this information. More people need to sort of move in this direction. We want to flip the orthodoxy. The information is the power there. So I appreciate your philosophy there and sharing the information.
Absolutely. There's what we need is more people to join the tribe.
Love that. Well, Joel, I really appreciate your time today. It's been educational, and I really just enjoy these topics, and the fact that we're able to blast this out to more people. Do you have any final asks, requests, or words for the listeners out there?
I guess if I had a parting thought here for today, it's just question the narrative. Just realize that there's almost no official narrative without some sort of an agenda behind it, and so be willing, ready, and eager actually to question whatever the narrative, the official speak, the official narrative is. The truth is probably somewhere different than where that narrative is.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you for that. And I hope everyone goes out and buys your book.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Patrick.
Thank you.